Hey guys, what's going on? Day before the US Open. I just wanted to do a quick update video for you guys. Basically, work through a lot of my process, tweak my model a little bit. Now I'm getting set up to basically load some lineups from a daily fantasy perspective. So I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of that. I thought this would be a good opportunity while I'm working through it, just to showcase some of those tools, since daily fantasy is a little bit more widely available across the country than betting. So just again, a quick update video. I think this will be good, get you exposure to maybe a different side of things in the fantasy world. So how I typically go about this, basically, I went through kind of my modeling effort. I've identified the guys that I want to use in my daily fantasy player pool. So what I'll be doing this week from a fantasy perspective is I will be max entering the Milly Maker, because this is supposed to be fun, right? That's not necessarily a positive expected value move. You really need to have one of your lineups go nuclear in order to be profitable on that side of things. But hopefully we hit it outright, and net at the end of the day we're profitable. So that's kind of the idea. That's kind of how I set things up. Let the sports betting side of things subsidize some of the fantasy play. So especially when I'm being aggressive and want to take some shots at the Milly Maker, because wouldn't it be great the first week that we're doing this to win $1 million? So basically where I'm landing then from a player pool perspective, so a lot of this is unchanged from the last video. If you want a deeper dive on some of the metrics behind this, take a look at the US Open breakdown video that I posted yesterday. But basically, guys in my player pool, I'm going to be using John Rahm. I'm going to be using Jason Kokrak, Tyrrell Hatton we talked about, Shane Lowry we talked about. So basically, a theme for all of the guys at the top of my model here is that they're either really long off the tee or they're really good with their long irons, right? And that's generally true down the board, with a couple exceptions. So I'll just call out some guys that I'm using. Again, all of the studs that we talked about yesterday. Hideki is rating out fairly high in my model too. I think he's actually going to be lower owned in fantasy. So one really important aspect of playing daily fantasy is called ownership leverage, essentially. So you're now not competing against just getting these plays right? Competing against the sportsbook. You're competing against other people. So this concept of going against the grain, playing some guys that other folks aren't playing, is really important from a fantasy perspective, because if those guys hit and end up playing really well, then you have surpassed all of those people, right? Conversely, if someone is really high owned, but they bust and you don't have them, that's another way of kind of leapfrogging everybody. So basically what I'm doing is I'm also layering in some of these lower owned guys that are rating out well in my model. So Hideki, Daniel Berger, Sanjay should be pretty low owned as well. So I'm going to show you guys some of my lineup builds here in a second, but that's the idea. And then down at the bottom, so some of these kind of value plays, long shots, Garrick Higo actually won last week in kind of a crazy fashion, but basically everybody else dropped off and he was kind of the last man standing. But he's a young South African, has played really well of late in general. So the stats may not reflect that, but just because he doesn't have a lot of experience on the PGA Tour. So he's going into my player pool. Sam Burns, who has been hotter than the sun of late, he's going to be in my player pool. Maybe the folks have jumped ship because he had kind of a bad tournament at the Memorial. But before that, he won at Valspar. He was second at the Charles Schwab. So he's definitely someone that I'm looking at immensely from an ownership leverage perspective. A couple other guys at the bottom. So Wyndham Clark is a guy that is just a personal favorite of mine. He is really long off the tee. He's really good around the green. He's a really good putter. So that combination, he kind of sucks with the irons. But when you're playing guys this deep, you really just want them to make the cut and maybe, if you're lucky, make a top 20, top 30 kind of play. And then these two guys at the bottom. So Guido he's an Italian player. He plays on the Euro Tour. He's been really good. He has some recent results that are pretty strong. Again, the European Tour is a little bit weaker, certainly in terms of the competition. But again, just trying to take some flyers that maybe other people won't be on. The other guy is Taylor Pendrith, who's on the Korn Ferry Tour, qualified for the U.S. Open. This guy can absolutely mash it off the tee, so he's pretty cheap in fantasy as well. So this is a snapshot of my player pool. I don't like to spread it too thin, so I'll be generating 150 lineups, max entering the Milly Maker. I have about 26 guys in the player pool, basically trying to get more or less even exposure to everybody. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've been working on with respect to lineup generation. So another useful tool in Fantasy National is you can actually build mass enter lineups, essentially. So the idea is that within kind of your player pool, you can set some different rules, set some different parameters. I'll show you guys how all of this works maybe in more detail later, but the idea is I can basically build 150 lineups. I can decide the salary range for my lineups, how many unique golfers in each lineup, and then I can also build some rules around how many players within a particular group. So basically, if I wanted to build certain types of lineups, so like as an example, I want to make sure I have at least 2 studs in every single lineup, right? I also want to make sure those crazy guys at the bottom that I talked about just now, I only want one of them in each of my lineups, right? So what you do, you run this, you get then exposure basically to every player, right? So I targeted basically around 30% or so at the top end, 20% kind of in the mid-range, and then a little bit lower at the end. And essentially what I'm doing is weighing that against the projected ownership. So I generally try and be overweight or match the field on almost all of my players. I know that's not maybe the most optimal way of doing it. Sometimes it makes sense just to match the field or go a little bit under the field, but I like to do this in a little bit more of an aggressive way. So that's just how I set it up. It's kind of a personal preference. But basically what I'm doing is, at the end of the day, I'm going to be more or less at least 2x the field on all of these studs in terms of the percentage of my 150 lineups. So as an example, Rory is going to be in about 28% of my lineups. He's only 13% owned. If Rory plays really well, these 42 lineups are going to pass everybody, right? That's kind of how to think about it. So you can see some of my exposures here as well. The other thing too, I'll just quickly plug guys that I have bet. So I've bet Rory, I've bet Xander, I've bet Victor Hovland, I've bet Patrick Cantlay and Tony Finau. Further down, I've bet Tyrrell Hatton, Shane Lowry, Gary Woodland, and I think that is it. So I'm keeping kind of the betting card a little bit light this week in terms of some of these plays. I think I only have 8 outright winner bets in play, but definitely going to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to fantasy. And like I said, as an example, like Sam Burns, he's only coming in at 10% owned. I'm going to have basically 2.5x the field on that. Some of these other guys, right, like Guido Migliozzi is only going to be about 2% owned. I'm going to have about 16% of him. So just a nice tool that allows me to build my 150 lineups. You can kind of see and get a snapshot of some of them here, right? So that's the idea. So I want to try and be unique, but not too unique. I want to play good players, not just build crazy lineups that have low ownership, but try and set it up in a way that basically gives me upside and differentiates me so that if my plays do go crazy, then hopefully I'll be sitting at or near the top of the leaderboard. That's the goal, right? If you're trying to win $1 million, you want to make sure you have some good low-owned kind of leverage plays in the mix, right? So Sungjae Im is another example of that. No one is going to use him this week. He gained 5.5 shots on approach last week, and I don't think people realize that. So I'm going to try and hopefully ride the momentum on Sungjae this week. He's typically a better player in Florida. I'm not betting him, but I'm going to use him in fantasy. So that's it for me for now. I think, again, just a bonus video for the week. Just wanted to show you guys a little bit of, how to think about lineup construction, how to use some of the tools in Fantasy National. And again, what I'm planning on doing later this week, or really this weekend, is a quick overview of live betting, looking at some of the stats and tools that I use for that. So, when you're in the middle of a tournament, maybe you're after 2 or 3 rounds, you have some information about how guys are playing on the course that week. And that's useful to try and find an edge in terms of, the live betting odds essentially. So it's also useful if you're trying to think about maybe you have some guys in the mix and you want to hedge, and maybe take some other folks that you maybe didn't bet pre-tournament, but try and give you a path to a profitable week. So stay tuned for that this weekend. Probably we'll get that out at some point on Saturday, once we have 2 rounds and we have visibility to who's going to make the cut on Friday. So stay tuned for that. Again, if you like the content, give the video a like, subscribe to my page, follow Driving the Green or DTG Analytics on Twitter, and we'll talk soon. So good luck. Really excited for the US Open. I think it should be a lot of fun. It's going to be a challenge, and I hope you guys have a profitable week if you're trailing any of this. So talk soon.